Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. We're going to start the room shortly. We're going to have a room right now regarding ADHD and Latino communities, a discussion and a project. My name is Rodrigo Bravo. We're going to get this conversation started. Just a little bit, folks, in first. We're going to get some folks up in here and have this discussion. It's a discussion that we really need to have. I'm excited to have it because we're going to be having some folks here that are doing the work that needs to be done to make this happen. And in fact, they're here on stage with me right now, and I'll definitely get to introducing them in shortly. But I definitely want to make sure that we share the room, that we also ping our friends in, because this is going to be an engaging conversation. But more importantly, there's a call to action with this book, with this project, and it's something that everybody can participate in. And in fact, we need participation in. And so I'm going to be stressing that during the entire discussion. I'm going to make sure that y'all know what the link is. I'm going to post it up in a little bit. But please ping some folks in, get some folks in here. I'm gonna share the room in a little bit. I hope everybody else does as well. If you're not familiar with that, look on the bottom. There's a little arrow, a box with an arrow right there. Click that and share it in your clubhouse hallways. You can also share it on your Twitter stream, your Facebook, or any other social media platform, or even send it a text. But we're going to have a great discussion, and more than likely, we'll also bring some folks up. The initial portion of this show will just focus on Miss Nicole and Miss Andrea, who are already here on stage. I want to talk about what drove them to write this, why specifically the Latino community, and how folks can help make this happen. So, very important discussion that we're going to have. At that point, though, we're definitely going to welcome folks up onto the stage if they have any questions, maybe even share a couple experiences or two. But with that said, very happy to have Nicole and Andrea here. Nicole, Andrea, how are you doing today? What's going on? Not all at once. Too excited. Or maybe it's me. Andrea, Nicole, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I had to reset my phone completely, and looks very strange now.
It looks very strange. Oh, okay. Maybe the app.
Yeah, I think it updated, I guess.
Yeah. It's been they've been going through a couple updates recently because of the new houses feature and trying to get folks to just kind of engage differently and whatnot. And so houses, groups, and all that good stuff. But I'm glad that y'all are here. Hopefully, y'all have had a good day today and are excited to hold this room as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited. Nicole, if you're having trouble with the mic, if it's not allowing you to come in and go out, you might have to leave the room and then come back in, um, or close the app and then come back. Because I was definitely having
No,
trouble.
I'm definitely here. I was just trying to give you a chance to go first. I'm sorry. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself and then I'll follow, or do you want
Oh
me to
no, I was
start?
just getting used to it, trying to get people to come in before we start the room. Thank you, Leslie, Wanda, and Yasmin, for coming in. Um, But I'm so glad that you finally got on here and that we're ready to go. So, Rodrigo, back to you.
No problem. Yeah, and we'll definitely get started on some introductions in just a second. But I just want to, I'm sending some invitations out as well to some folks. Make sure that they come through in this discussion because we're not only just going to talk about it, we're also going to do some action behind it. And I think that's the most important part, really. We have a lot of discussions here on Clubhouse, on Twitter, and etc. But a lot of times the action is missing, right? But today we actually have action that we can take. And I really want to stress how important that is because the discussions again are great. But if we don't have anything to actually resolve the issues or have solutions to help, our community and nuestra gente, it's almost like we're just spinning our wheels a little bit, right? So that's why it's important to have this discussion regarding ADHD and Latino communities and the discussion, but also the project. And shortly, I'm going to go ahead and pin this link right now and then we'll go ahead and get started with the conversation. But this link is really important because this is actually going to be a Google form that we're going to post right now. I'm going to go ahead and just grab it right quick. And this Google form is for folks to be able to go ahead and participate in the book project. See, Nicole and Andrea are writing this book together, but they need folks. They need folks to share their stories, to talk about how ADHD has impacted their lives and why what we're going through. We're going to get through some more specifics and so forth, but that's why this link here that I'm about to post in just a second is so important, because it's part of the actions that we can take to help our community. And so, with that said, I am going to go ahead and start the room up properly, with some introductions and some information regarding our guest here. We do have Miss Miss Nicole Biscotti here. She is a mom, an educator, an author, a speaker, a podcaster, a Spanish translator. That is her Clubhouse bio. But let me tell you something, okay? Nicole is a powerhouse when it comes to education, okay? I'm going to go ahead and read off Nicole Biscotti's bio first, and then she can say a few words. Nicole is a Spanish teacher in Southern California and lives in Mexico. She writes, speaks, and provides professional development for teachers around whole class accommodations for ADHDers and all learners. Besides writing books, she also translates books into Spanish. Nicole, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you very much. It's so kind of you to say that, Rodrigo. I'm great. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hosting this space for us and for your support. And thank you for everyone that's here today.
We're going to have a great discussion. And I want to tell y'all, Nicole has been at the front lines of advocacy when it comes to this. And I really appreciate what she's done. I've known Nicole for a while. In fact, she invited me onto a radio program to talk about it because my son is also diagnosed with ADHD. And we shared our experiences, and I followed her on Twitter a long time ago. And I've always been a fan of her advocacy because she really, it's not just something to do or she studied it. She has a passion for it, and I really appreciate that from Nicole. So no one better to talk about this than Nicole and Andrea. With that said, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Miss Andrea Sanchez Aguirre. She her bio is as follows. Andrea is a teacher in San Antonio, Texas. She advocates for the Latinx community and is on a mission to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. Beyond her coalition work in Texas, she creates curriculum in the Web3 space. She is a consultant for a think tank, an Apple deployment manager, and an instructional designer. Andrea not only is a big advocate in those arenas, she's a strong supporter of Clubhouse. In fact, she is one of the first persons to get a house, one of the new beta features here in Clubhouse for educators. And she has that house, and she's actively designing that house to be somewhat of a resource for teachers here on this space. So definitely appreciate Andrea, not just as an educator and as advocate, but also as a friend. I admire the work that she does and consider her honestly one of the biggest inspirations in my life, because she's always put in others first, always put in students first, even to maybe to the fault of her career at her job and stuff like that. And maybe we can talk about that later on. But Andrea, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the stage.
Hi, Rodrigo. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. So I like to introduce myself with my full name, especially because we might be using this replay for later. So my name is Andrea Olga Ortega Gonzalez Guillen Medina Diaz Treviño Sanchez Aguirre. And I am coming to you from San Antonio, Texas. And I'm so grateful to Rodrigo for introducing me to this app and introducing me to an entire world of different social media platforms and ways to stay connected with people during the pandemic. I credit this with a lot of the work that I'm doing as far as the research available and the connections that I've made. So this all started because I wanted to write. I got a fellowship, and I was recruited to come to San Antonio, Texas. And with that fellowship, there was a requirement for me to create a. Hi, Danay. So glad to have you. There was a requirement for me to create a group, and within the group, decided to focus on the school to prison pipeline, which is a lot of the work that I do. A lot of the coalition work is advocacy for students, Latino students, and so coming in here, those kind words, Rodrigo, was that's really kind of you to mention all that, and To the detriment of my job. Yep. Last year, I walked away from the job because I didn't believe in the way that the principal was going to be punishing all of the students. And here I am working against one very specific type of pedagogy, carceral pedagogy. And I'm in the midst of the fellowship and the midst of creating and starting the research for this project. For what would become this project now, and here she is, like, as soon as students get in trouble, you need to send them right away to the office. They need to be suspended. They're going to be expelled after 3 times, and we have to bring in their parents. And all of this was just absolutely crazy to me. So when Rodrigo says that I, much to the detriment of my job, I will put my job on the line anytime when it comes to that. Did the same thing at the State Board of Education meeting that happened on the 1st of August. I knew very much that that was going to be a scary item. There's a lot of teachers that will not go and speak on that in front of the Texas, and I did that knowing that I didn't have a contract. I didn't have anything to lose. I can go and speak freely, and I love that freedom that comes with it because I'm not one to hold back. So this was really near and dear to me for many reasons, which we'll get into a little bit later. But thank you, Rodrigo, once again for all the kind words.
I definitely mean my praise and my admiration for both of you ladies, because this is hard work, and this is work that sometimes doesn't even get recognized. Isn't definitely doesn't sometimes doesn't get paid for, but y'all are doing it to better our kids. And I know Nicole has been doing this for quite a while as well, and that's how Nicole and I really met, engaging on Twitter and talking about how this impacts us. And so, before we get started into the conversation, I'm going to have a couple questions, and then obviously we're going to lead into the project. But I want to go ahead and just right off the gate, folks, the link is up there right now. There's an interest form for possible Zoom interviews. Okay. Nicole and Andrea are looking for folks to interview regarding this ADHD project. And I apologize that I keep saying it wrong. I have a Mexican tongue, so just se me atraban las palabras a veces, and ADHD is one of those words that just, or acronyms, that just gets me every time. So I
Pues
apologize for
ponle
that.
TDAH. In Spanish, it's TDAH, if that's
That
easier.
no, peor. Me pierdo. I'm gonna get lost with that. So let's not even go to the Spanish right now. But thank you for that tip. But look, but seriously, folks, this form right here is so that Nicole and Andrea can engage with y'all, speak with y'all regarding this topic, regarding this issue. You'll get some more information regarding the project, but I'm encouraging everybody I can to go ahead and sign up for the form, check it out, answer the questions, and Andrea and Nicole will get back to you regarding this form. And it's really important. And I want to go ahead and just get started with our discussion. I'm here to facilitate the conversation because Nicole and Andrea are definitely the experts when it comes to this. But before we get into the real meat of the subject, let's go ahead and just start with a short bio first, right? And maybe talking about how did y'all get involved with this? Is this something that maybe it's personal? Is it something professional? And then how did y'all meet? How did y'all get together on this project? Because you don't see this often, honestly, where two women who obviously have a lot of passion for the cause and also a lot of knowledge, decide to say, hey, let's team up. Let's go ahead and make this happen. So, Nicole, can you speak to that a little bit? And how did you get started with this, with this passion of yours?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So I have 4 kids, and I'm a teacher. And my fourth son, so my fourth kid, presented some behaviors that were very remarkable to me when he was in preschool. And I was a single mom at the time, and I knew that there were some things that were pretty different about the way that he behaved. And I was honestly getting absolutely no assistance or help or feedback that was in any way productive or helping me figure out how to meet his needs, other than he was bad. And he was being punished a lot at school and receiving a lot of punitive measures. And I got to tell you, and I don't speak openly about this. I probably feel safer because it's a small group and it's like verbal. But I was also a single mother who had just left and ran across the country from a man that acted very much like the way my son was acting. So it was pretty scary. because his father ended up in prison with those behaviors, with those impulse control and all that sort of thing. So here I had moved across the country, reestablished my life, became a teacher, and my son is showing impulse control, showing problems with self-regulation, sensory overload, all these things, and I didn't know anything about it. And then I started to realize as I got into this journey with Jason that I wasn't the only teacher that didn't know anything about it. And as a matter of fact, and as I've done research and interviewed hundreds of teachers, probably most general education teachers don't know anything about this or very little about neurodiversity because teacher education doesn't adequately address it. We're lucky if we got like a chapter or two here and there, which in my opinion is negligent because we are tasked with teaching kids that are neurodivergent and we're not given the proper training, support, or practicum in that area. So that's something that I really advocate for. And as a Hispanic woman, I've really felt I teach heritage Spanish, and my colleagues used to think it was really cool that I had less IEPs to go to. And I didn't think that was really cool because I don't believe that I had less kids with ADHD in my classroom. As a matter of fact, as I learned more and more about ADHD, I teach high school. I used to call it a bunch of tall Jasons in my classroom, is how I pointed them out or how I um, experienced it. But it was very obvious to me that there was a lot of kids around me that probably had ADHD, but they weren't identified as much. And as I started to do research, I learned that that wasn't just limited to the kids under my care. That is definitely a nationwide phenomenon that our Latino children are not being identified and supported. So then I started delving into why is that? What's going on? What factors are at play? And what are the outcomes? And it's not good. It's not pretty. So taking advantage of the fact that I'm living in Mexico right now, I've had the opportunity to interview some educators down here and start to understand what is their education background like? Where are they coming from? I think before we really get into some effective policies, we need to understand where they're from, where they're coming from. Children aren't born when they cross the border; they're coming with an educational background already. So that's really where I'm coming from in my approach, in my research, in my passion. Is looking at these obstacles, looking at these differences, looking at what's getting lost in translation, if you will, between the US policies and the needs of these children. And how I got connected with Andrea, I don't remember where we got connected, but I can't even imagine not being connected with Andrea because we have so much in common in terms of our interests and what we're passionate about.
I remember.
Of course, Andrea remembers. Andrea, what did you and Nicole meet, and how did that happen? And also talk about how ADHD affects your life and how it affects your loved ones and so forth.
So, um, I'm a mother of two children, a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old. And my 10-year-old had the same kind of things that were happening, just this behaviors early on in his life that didn't seem like his brother, didn't seem like my brother, didn't seem like anybody in my family. And I didn't know what to do with it. Just an exceptional child, was not afraid of touching a hot oven. When he was little, he wanted to run in front of a vehicle because he wanted to know the pain that it felt like to run in front of a vehicle. And I was searching for help. And much in the same way that Nicole had was had to go across the country and um, run away from her ex-husband, I was doing the same thing in the pandemic and going through the process, only leaving my city, leaving behind a really toxic relationship, getting a divorce, and having to go into hiding um, because of it, because it was such a dangerous situation, divorcing my ex husband. And he had the same issues. I could see the same things that were happening to my ex husband happening. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I don't do something now with my boys, I know that there's something going on. If I don't do something now, they're going to suffer the same fate. What's going on here? all this is culminating while I'm still teaching. The pandemic is going on. I had just started, and uh, come out to Houston, Texas, and we have to sit in a room while they're diagnosing my son, because I had noticed that he had these weird tics going on, and I didn't know what was going on. And I had done some research on it, but I didn't want to investigate further. I wanted to know from the doctor what was going on. So I'm sitting there in the room, and we have to sit there for a good 3-4 hours, coming in, doctors going out, nurses coming in, diagnosticians, all of these things. The Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas is absolutely amazing. So here we are with the neurologist, and he finally comes in 4 hours later, and he says, we definitely see that your son has Tourette syndrome. He's got OCD and he has ADHD. And, um, and from what you're telling me, it looks as though he presents with an ADHD, much like your ex-husband, and your other son, who's also in the room, presents ADHD like you have ADHD. And I kind of like was startled at the news, and I thought, I don't have ADHD. I'm here because my younger son is exhibiting some kind of behavior. And I was thinking this in my head, and I just took that back, and I thought, okay, he's telling me this for a reason. This is a neurologist who's been sitting with me and my children for the last 3 or 4 hours, have been observing me, and they're doing all these diagnostic exams on him. They did MRIs, they did EEGs, they did all of these things, and then they did disruptive behavior disorder rating scales with him, and brought in what teachers were saying and all these things. And I thought, So in that moment, something just clicked, and I thought, okay, I probably do have ADHD. So we're still teaching online because the pandemic hasn't cleared anything up in Texas at this time. Go back with this information, getting some information for my son. And as a mother, as a concerned mother, anytime a child gets diagnosed with something, you're going to delve right into it and figure this out all the way into it. And being the person that I am, I really went into the rabbit hole of ADHD. So I do this, and I happen to have the honor of teaching a bunch of alternative students. I had 22 students that were given to me that fall break. They had run off every substitute. They didn't know what to do with them. I stepped up and I said, hey, I'll take them on. Legally, there was only 15 allowed on the campus, and so we had to really get them, a lot of these students, back out into the classroom. So I did as much as I could. I kept the 15 core students that I knew that I needed to work with a little bit more. The other students went back to the classrooms. And with those 15 students, while they were under my supervision, I started noticing a lot of behaviors, ADHD symptoms, because here I am in the throngs of researching this. And I thought to myself, these kids don't have 504s. They don't have IEPs. Their parents aren't highly involved. You have a lot of them going through traumatic situations. And I knew early on that trauma presents itself like ADHD as well. So you could have symptoms on either one. But um, the recourse and the way to help these students is the same. It's with medication, it's with treatment, it's with interventions. But instead of receiving interventions, they were receiving punishment. And why was it that it was primarily the Latinos on the campus and none of the white students on the campus? And I've been in coalition work since I can remember. Since I was 10 years old, my parents got me into advocating and being an advocate since very young. And I knew right away that there was a disparity in the classroom in the way that I was handling it. So I was granted a fellowship to investigate this further. Came to San Antonio. In San Antonio, started connecting. Rodrigo started connecting me to a lot of people. Thank you again. And he said, you have to put it out there. You have to ask people. You have to ask them, what you need, and just be bold about it. And I thought, I've never done that before. And Nicole Biscotti, she's got a book out with her son that she had written prior about ADHD, about moving, which was really helpful for me and my children. And as a teacher, just allowing students to be active in the classroom was so important. And I was really advocating that for my son. And I thought, okay, here I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to approach this author. She's got all these people on Twitter. Oh my gosh, she runs this like global chat. I don't even know how to approach her. But then I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, by the way, Rodrigo said that you had interviewed him. I just wanted to, be in contact with you. This is what I'm thinking about creating a documentary about ADHD and the Latino experience because I really feel that ADHD and the symptoms and the reasons that the students are not getting diagnosed is what's leading to the school to prison pipeline." And she was like, "Absolutely. I definitely want to get onto this project, but I don't want to just help you. I want to be part of it. Let me help you write this. Let's reframe this." Right away, she started, talking to me about the research and how we're going to frame this out. And I just thought, oh my God, I finally found somebody that actually understands all of the research and everything that I'm doing. And this is amazing. And so it was in part to you, Rodrigo, for introducing me and telling me to go and be brave and be bold and reach out to Nicole. And I did. And she was really responsive and she's been absolutely fantastic. And because she already wrote a book with EduMatch, she knew who to go and contact for the publisher. And she said, "Hey, before you do the documentary, why don't we do the research, we turn it into the book, and then think about the documentary afterwards?" Which to me makes a lot more sense, right? So that's how we ended up coming here. So it was a full culmination. All of this was a perfect storm of opportunity. My children, myself having ADHD, the students that I'm teaching having ADHD, the fact that I'm running away from my now ex-husband because he was also presenting with ADHD with the highly compulsive behavior with the high criminal rates, and here he goes, away, and then this started, and so it's been this process of going back and forth, and we thought we want to approach this differently. We want to approach this with Latinos in mind, and instead of taking a standard um, approach of taking research, we wanted to do it differently, and that's why we're here today to ask for people to please get into the interest form. We want to interview you, and we'll go into that more later. But we want to do it in the Latino way, and we want to do it true to our heritage, to our culture, um, and honor that, and use our voices to change for the better, because this is not right, and Latinos shouldn't be getting punished at higher rates because they're not getting diagnosed, because the diagnosis is not swayed towards Latinos. Right? There's a huge discrepancy in that. If people really understood, brown and black people, so Latinos and black people we make up about 27% of the United States general population, as in everybody, but we make up 66% of the prison population. And that's not right. That is not right, that we are overwhelming the prison population. And in the state of Texas, there's more prisoners here than there are in some countries around the world, which is a travesty. So we're sending our young men and our young women to prison simply because of this. And that's not right. And we need to disrupt that. And we need to say and shine light to that. And I bet you there's a lot of other people that have experienced that have experienced these problems in school, that have experienced getting in trouble instead of getting helped. And we want your voices to be out there to change that, to change the narrative so that we can change the policy. And that's why we started with this book. So
Andrea and Nicole, thank y'all so much for just kind of answering why this is so important to y'all, why y'all are so passionate about this, and your advocacy for it, and meeting up, and how everything does come full circle, right? And when we put ourselves in places where we live our authentic selves, these types of interactions happen, and we're able to really tackle things that are so important to our community. I want to stress the form that Andrea mentioned right now. It's on the link right now. I posted the link on the very top. Please fill out that form. You may think, hey, I don't know if I could contribute a lot, or I don't know, I don't even know anybody, or my cousin, or this and that. It doesn't matter. If you have an interest in this and you're thinking about how can I help our comunidad, you might know somebody. You might be personally working with that, where ADHD, and how to handle it in your own, or maybe you've already confronted that. What have you done? What did you see? Or did you have a family member that, unfortunately, because they didn't have the resources, ended up somewhere that they shouldn't have been had they had the resources? Please click on the link on the very top. It is an interest form. for a possible Zoom interview for the book that Nicole and Andrea are writing right now. The name of that book that's coming up, the name of the book is Invisible con ADHD: Real Voices, Real Policy for Latino Students. But before we get into that book, though, I do want to go ahead and mention Nicole's first book, I Can Learn When I'm Moving, Going to School with ADHD. And Nicole, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us about that book, how that came about, and what the book is about? Because I've heard you speak on this book. It was an important book. And if folks are really looking for some resource right now, that is a fantastic book. I would strongly encourage you to go to Nicole's page. She has her Twitter account linked right there. Go to her Twitter account. She has the link there. I'll also post a link to her book in a little bit for in place of the form. But Nicole, tell us about that book first. When you wrote that book, what was the purpose of that book? How did you come about to write that book, and what have you seen as a result of writing that book?
Thank you very much. So basically, that book started out as me having Jason journal, my son. When he would get upset, we were looking for ways, or I was looking for ways to create space between him becoming very angry and then having his action. So one of the things that we started doing was him journaling as voice to text on my phone. And then he would just talk when he was mad on my phone, and then I would reflect on what he had written later on. And I started to realize that we were writing a narrative. And I it prompted me to do a lot of research. Like I said, being a teacher and a mom, I really feel like one informs the other all the time. Being a mom makes me a better teacher, and being a teacher makes me a better mom. And I was seeing everything in my classroom that was going on, and I was seeing everything with Jason, and then being connected with other educators on social media. And I started to look into, I wanted to really have everything. Then I started piecing it together and writing. And the whole time that I wrote that book, I wrote it with Jason's consultation, let's say. So every strategy in the book was like, okay, Jason, so usually teachers are told to do X, Y, and Z with kids with ADHD. Do you agree with that? And he would say, yes. Why? Because of this. No, I don't like that. That's annoying. I prefer teachers to do this. And then I would go back and do research on it. So every strategy that I offer in that book is directly taken from the voice of Jason. And with Jason's permission, I also have literally his writing in that book as well. So there's passages in the book that will talk the reader through when he was having an episode of being really out of control in a classroom and how he was feeling during the episode. And I'm really grateful to him for being willing to share that, because I think it's so valuable for teachers and parents even to read that and to understand what a child could be feeling at that moment. It's not to say that every child, of course, is feeling the same thing, but to have that perspective. So that was really the intention. And then as I started to connect with other educators, there was also a number of other educators that gave me content specific strategies that I felt were really, really led from what Jason was asking for, but they were the experts in those content areas, so I included their strategies as well. So that's really kind of in a nutshell what the book is about.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And I really wanted to emphasize why that was important, because often we do see things that unfortunately we don't have the resources to battle with, right? Or to handle with, I'm sorry. And you took it upon yourself to make a difference. And now you making that difference is making a difference in other families' lives. And so I just wanted to thank you for that and for writing that book, because a lot of times we are overwhelmed by the magnitude of a situation that we don't know what to do, right? But you took it step by step and said, okay, let's figure this out. You had buy-in from your son, which I particularly admire. I am a co-parenting coach and consultant myself, and I always stress the importance of buy-in. And the fact that you even said, "Hey, with my son's permission," that's what the way it's supposed to be. It's not just your story; it's also your son's story. But the book is very personal, and so I love that you had that because it is a very hard thing. There's a stigma out there right now for kids and even parents, right? For ADHD. I myself, my son, my youngest, he was diagnosed when he was younger. And I'm not going to lie, I was one of those parents that didn't want to do certain things. I was very ignorant to a couple of the things that eventually helped my son out. And so I think it's very important that we're honest with our experiences so that other folks who maybe are in the same boat realize, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to approach it from this way instead of my lens and my perspective. So I definitely recommend folks check out the book. Nicole has her Twitter account right there. I'll go ahead and find the book and post a link up on the very top in just a little bit. But thank you for sharing that, Nicole. And yes, I want to just stress everybody here. We are going to let a few folks up in a little while, but we're going to be talking about the book first. But we're also talking about that link. So a lot of things are going on right now. First things first, click on that link on the very top right now. Go ahead and sign up, fill out that interest form, and let's help this actually happen. We have so many discussions, we have conversations about things, right? But what are the actions that we have? And a lot of times we don't have actions, right? The things aren't prepared or things aren't set up or we don't know what the next thing is to do. We have a call of action right here, right now, folks. So please click on the link right now, fill out the form, and let's get our voices heard and let's make sure that we contribute so we can help families out there when it comes to ADHD, especially when it comes to our Latino communities, because our Black and brown kids right now, they really are suffering. I put some stats in the chat right now when it comes to the CDC, and the rates of diagnosis are significantly higher for white children than they are for African American and Latino counterparts. Why is that? Well, there's a variety of factors, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But let's go ahead and talk about the book itself, right? And so, Andrea, the name of the book that you and Nicole are writing right now, the name of the book is Invisible, con HD. Oh my God, I'm sorry, y'all. My ADHD, I can't say that, but I'll try a little bit better.
Okay.
Let me try it again. All right, Invisible con ADHD. Real Voices, Real Policy for Latino Students. And a real brief bio of this book. The book provides a research based, culturally relevant policy framework inspired by the voices and stories of Latinx students, their educators, both in the US and Latino America, and parents. The purpose of this book is to shed light on the unique set of circumstances that cause diagnosis and treatment to be disproportionately low through stories, perspectives, and research. It offers culturally effective policy solutions that could be implemented that would be relevant to the educational and cultural backgrounds of many Latinx families. It also highlights the successful models and offers resources and strategies for educators and, of course, provides hope. Andrea, that's a fantastic summary of the book. When you and Nicole are writing this, when y'all are just getting started, talk about how that framework is developing, but also why it is so important that we do have voices from our comunidad in this book and not just data and rhetoric and maybe thoughts about situations. Why is it so important to include the voices in this book?
Thank you for that question. So, when we are walking around, this disorder is not something that you can see. It's a disorder that very much is invisible. And that's one of those words that in English or in Spanish, invisible, you're invisible, or the disorder itself is invisible. But it leaves a path of destruction if you're not able to understand it. And, I'm seeing in the chat, like, oh, I knew at the age of 6, at the age of 5, at the age of whatever. Now, biologically, it's really almost impossible to diagnose children earlier. And a lot of the DSMRs and all of these things that formulate how doctors can now diagnose this are changing. And they're changing because of the FDA and the way that they are controlling medication. So, how does this all play into it? In the 80s, a lot of children were walking around like little zombies because every doctor was prescribing this magic medication that allowed children to sit down for extended periods of time. What the shift was from the 70s to the 80s is that we had a lot of standardized tests that were being introduced. And so now children had to stay sitting down for a lot longer. We're talking a couple of hours, less recess, less time outside for lunch, less time outside to play, less time outside to do PE. And now you're asking them to sit down, behave, do whatever the teacher wants to do without getting in trouble. Um, and so here's this magic little pill that you just ran to the doctor and said, "Oh, my child doesn't know how to sit well in the class." And they overprescribed this medication. So now there was an overprescription of this medication for a certain population. And they felt like we really need to fight this. Now there's this drug on wars that's happening with Ronald Reagan and all of these things that ended up happening, political shifts, right? And so um, it was really difficult. And it's become very difficult to get diagnosed. Then above and beyond that, if you're looking at it, it's a very acculturated way of getting diagnosed because you're going off of a disruptive behavior disorder rating scale. Now, a lot of assessments, especially within this field, have started with eugenics, have started with trying to keep out people of color from higher places. IQ testing, SAT testing, GRE testing, all of these tests, LSAT testing, all of them stem from a eugenics point of view, which shifts how we look at students. And if you're looking at the disruptive behavior disorder rating scale, you're looking at it through a very white male lens, because most of the studies in ADHD were done on white males in the 1970s. And so here we have this very acculturated test, very acculturated way of diagnosing children. And so when we have very passionate, very loud, very machismo led people into the classrooms, it's going to look like they are disruptive, that they are just not behaving, that they are doing all these things, right? So this preliminary evidence and the preliminary ways of looking at students was not very good. Never mind you the narrative of, dirty Mexicans, or all Mexicans are terrorists, or all Mexicans are dangerous, or that's also um, another downfall for our community, right? So while it looks for other people, you can't look at the disorder. You can't look at it and say, "Oh, this person has it." You can't go and take a blood test and say, "Hey, you have ADHD." You're walking around with a disorder, but that disorder causes this destruction in so many different aspects of your life, in personal relationships, in professional relationships, in jobs, keeping a job. How many people just up and quit because they got flustered that day? That's an impulse, and you don't do those things. What about when you get frustrated in school, you punching that wall? Well, if you're somebody that's not Mexican, you'll probably get wraparound services. But if you are a Latino and you punch a wall and you have that narrative already that you're a dangerous individual, what's going to happen to you? Right. So I don't want that to happen. And you might be invisible, the disorder might be invisible, but the destruction is not. So
Thank you so much, Andrea. Nicole, did you want to add into that and how it is very important for us to have studies, have frameworks that are really built for us, right? Andrea was talking about earlier how many of the studies, and unfortunately, this is actually very true with a lot of medicine when it comes to research, when it comes to data. A lot of it actually doesn't reflect us. We're kind of assuming that it's also applicable, but the folks that were, participating or were studied or whatever you want to call it, they didn't reflect us. Why is it so important to have that, Nicole?
Well, in this particular, with the diagnosis for ADHD, it's essential because, like Andrea was saying, there's not a blood test. A diagnosis for ADHD has to happen between three different people: a clinician, or like a doctor, a teacher, and a parent. So that already implies that there has to be fluid communication between the three parties. Well, we already know that often there's a language barrier. and the language line doesn't cut it. Although I did interpret for them for a stint in college. But beyond that, we have cultural barriers. We have we have to have culturally relevant policies, because if parents don't know what it is that the teachers are expecting from them to report, to communicate, what the actual framework of the communication should be to come at a to to come together jointly for a diagnosis of ADHD, it's not going to work. I found it interesting that as I'm interviewing educators in Mexico, it's very normal and expected for teachers to just straight out tell parents, I think your kid has ADHD. Um, the first time an educator told me that, I was sipping coffee and I was on a Zoom call and I almost spit my coffee. I was like, what, are you kidding me? You guys say that? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, wow, I'd get like sued. Because in Mexico, the expectation apparently, or at least, this from the people I'm speaking to, is that the teacher, that's something that's very normal for a teacher to suggest to a parent. In the US, that's not the case. We would do a child study. We would refer information to a psychology department or a counseling department, and then that would be handled differently. We're not allowed to diagnose or make suggestions like that, and we're not even qualified to. It's very different. So when you're having parents that are maybe accustomed to teachers saying things like that, and then you have teachers that are not communicating in that style or being so direct or just complaining about behaviors, there's already a breakdown there. So that's just like one little possible breakdown. But there's many, many, many breakdowns that are going on. There's also different expectations around behavior. Um, like Andrea was mentioning, the macho behaviors and how people might perceive Mexican children or Hispanic children. There's also the idea that a lot of Hispanic parents feel that more movement is acceptable and is healthy and is to be expected porque son niños, and even encouraged in some settings. So it has to be it has to be relevant to the cultural expectations, or it's just not going to happen because the communication's not there. And going back to why these interviews are so important is because we can't tell the story with any fidelity. We can't suggest policies that are relevant if we don't listen to actual stories. And just to be clear, we want to interview people that have had great outcomes. We want to interview people that have had not very great outcomes. We want to interview people that are pretty sure they have ADHD. We want to interview people that know they have ADHD. If you're a first generation immigrant, if you are from the United States, but you're Latino, we really would like to have a mix of experiences so that we can really start to look at the trends and hear the voices and accurately tell your story.
Thank you, Nicole, for sharing that. And it just goes to show how different the work is being done in different communities, and why frameworks like the ones that y'all are developing are so important, right? If we have communities out there that are doing things one way, and then other communities are doing it another way, and then yet another way in another community, our kids unfortunately are just going to experience this in different ways. And that's why it is important to have these frameworks, to have these policies, these structures in place, especially when they're designed by us, by nuestra gente, folks who are part of our communities and who are actually dealing with the same issues, the same struggles, the same joys, the same just feelings that are associated with this, myself included. Again, my son was diagnosed as a young age, and I definitely had a stigma. I was falling into that stigma, and we can talk about that in just a bit. I just want to again focus on the call of action. We're having this discussion right now regarding a new book that is underway that is being written by Nicole and Andrea, both educators, both very respected in their fields, and they're tackling this issue to provide this framework. They have a book that will be coming out, but before they even have this book and they can start writing it and whatnot, they need participation from our community. There's a form on the very top. Click on that link, folks. You may think, I'm not sure about that, or I don't know who, I don't even know if I'm diagnosed and this and that. We're having folks right now in the chat talking about, hey, I just got diagnosed this year. Okay, and we're not even talking about kids. We're talking about adults. And this is what we're dealing with, the stigma. Maybe somebody didn't get diagnosed till they were an adult because they didn't want to get diagnosed, or their family had this stigma about it, right? Or they've been dealing with it, they didn't even know. They didn't realize, hey, you know what, I'm showing these signs and so forth. You may even think a lot of times people talk about that, right? Oh, it's my AD, they're not diagnosed. I say that myself, right? But here we are walking around as full grown adults getting diagnosed with ADHD. Why is that important? We're also going to talk about that. Why is that important, right? Look, fill the form out. I want folks to get on. This is an actual point of action that we can take to help our community. So sign the form, check it out. Nicole and Andrea will get back with you regarding this interview, because there is a process for it. They're going to do these Zoom interviews, but more importantly, it's about getting our stories out there when it comes to ADHD. Nicole and Andrea are obviously sharing their story, but we want more members of the community to share their story as well. Nicole, did you want to add something? I saw you on mic. I don't know if you wanted to jump in really quick. If not, I can definitely go to the next question.
No, I apologize. I just forgot to.
Oh, it's okay. No, no, no problem. No problem. No problem. Well, with that said, though, again, I want y'all to check out that link. You can even click on it and then click on the bottom button so that your browser opens it, and then come back to the room, and you can fill it out as you're listening or whatever you want to do. But please, folks, this interest form is really important, not just for their book, but for our community. We need these answers out there. So I want to go ahead and go on towards the stigmas. Both of you have already touched on it, but it's really important that we kind of talk about this stigma of invisible syndromes like ADHD and how it affects the Latinx community specifically. When we are talking about incarceration rates, right? This is actually a direct derivative of the lack of diagnosis for some of our kids, and I want to talk about these stigmas. I'm going to share a quick story regarding my son, because when my son was diagnosed, his mother and we co-parent, and at the time she wanted to put him on medicine and I didn't, and I had this stigma, y'all. I really was falling for this stigma big time. I was embarrassed. I like, nah, my son don't need that shit. He doesn't need that, man. You know what, no, 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 we just need a little more structure, more discipline, or whatever, right? And it wasn't until a friend of mine who was a principal at an elementary school. And I told her the story that was going on, and I was telling her like, "Hey, look at me, tough dad, putting it to." And she told me, she says, "No, if your son needs that, you need to get them. You're actually denying your son help." And I said, "What?" And she was the first one that actually introduced me to the concept of my son lagging and falling behind if his behavior wasn't addressed. That he would be labeled a troublemaker, that he would be labeled a talker, and that he would slowly start regressing, and he would fall into these cracks where he gets disciplined, where he gets sent home, from school, he gets ISS, and then the record starts building up. And then now he starts feeling like, hey, I am a bad kid. I'm doing all this stuff and I'm getting written up. And then I'm over here yelling at my. It's an endless cycle, y'all. It's a negative feedback loop that starts creating on its own, all because of my stubbornness, all because of my ignorance, really, towards that issue. And finally, when my friend talked to me about that, and I really kind of I sunk into the numbers and read about some of this stuff, not to the depth that Andrea and Nicole did, but enough to say like, oh my God, I think I'm messing up. We got my son the help that he needed. Not only the medicine, but a little bit of work as well. And 3 years later, my son was able to get off the medicine. and we started developing some structures and whatnot because he had a good base to work from. And I consider that kind of one of my ugliest moments as a dad, because I was just so stuck with that stigma and thinking that I was just gonna, this sounds terrible, y'all, but like I was gonna beat the ADHD out of my son. And I'm not talking about physical abuse, y'all, or like even spanking my kids. I don't really do that, but beating it out of him with words, right? Beating it out of him with shame and, come on, man, just shut up in class. What are you talking? And this, he needed more help than that. And I share that story, folks, because a lot of times we parent the way our parents parent, right? And so we don't know any better. I had to learn that, and I was so grateful to my friend that helped me with that, because she really put me in check and said, like, yo, you doing more harm to your kids, to your son, because you're holding on to the stigma. And so I wanted to let Andrea and Nicole talk about this stigma and how these syndromes like ADHD affect our community in such a negative way that we end up unfortunately harming our kids.
If I could just address that, Rodrigo, first of all, I put it in the chat. Listen, I did the same thing. I was terrified of medicating my son. I felt like I wasn't going, like he wasn't going to be the same person anymore. I felt like it was a failure. I researched and researched strategies. I went to all these meetings with things, research papers highlighted. I fought that so hard. So I get it. It took me realizing that Jason's self-esteem was suffering. He was already labeled a troublemaker, but it took me realizing that his actual self-esteem had suffered for me to give in to the medicine. So please, if it makes you feel any better, I've spoken to a lot of parents, and a lot of parents go through that. And it's just coming from, we're trying to do our best. We're trying so hard and we just don't know. And probably that backlash from the 80s when there was probably like over medication going on, or that was kind of the messaging. Um, but back to the stigma thing, I just want to address communication. So going back to how we need three parties to have really good communication: a doctor, a teacher, and a parent. If we don't have that communication, the kids are not going to get the support that they need. They're not even going to get a diagnosis. And unfortunately, it becomes harder when we have cultural barriers, when we have language barriers, and when we have different expectations approaching the education system and approaching parents. So there's also expectations that people have approaching parents, teachers have approaching parents, that are different in Latin American culture and vice versa. So there's also those issues. Um, there's also a mistrust. There's also a tendency for people to feel like, well, why does my this teacher just wants to put my kid on medicine? He's just running around. He's just a typical boy. As he's son. So there's that as well. And in
Nick,
terms of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Nicole. Go ahead. Go ahead.
And in terms of the stigma, we still have a lot of work to do around invisible conditions. You know, People still have a hard time accepting that medicine is necessary sometimes. And sometimes kids do need medication to function well at school, and it's the best thing for them. But when we don't have that frame of reference, because we're familiar with, we took an antibiotic and a fever went down. That's something that we have a lot of, generations of experience with. But we don't have generations of experience with so and so took ADHD medication and now they're doing better.
No, that's a
So,
great point, Nicole. And Andrea, what did you want to add into this?
okay. I have a very different experience. I could not wait, but I could not wait because my children were literally destroying my house during the pandemic. Um, at this point, and I just thought, oh my gosh, if they're doing this at home, and mind you, we were bicycling, we went running. I took them out quite a bit. I was doing way more we would do an hour and a half workout before school. I fed them lots of protein. I did all the diets. I keep them away from the sugars and the dyes and everything else, and it still wasn't working. I was doing the vitamins, doing alternative therapies on them, and it still wasn't working. And then I thought, if my kid needed glasses, am I going to deny my kid glasses because there's a stigma, like they're going to be a nerd? No, I want to go get him glasses, right? And if we look at this, 1/3 of children in the United States suffer from a mental health disorder. And that's 3 out of 10 kids. That's a lot. But unfortunately, because there's a stigma that's associated with it, half of those kids will never get services. They'll never get professional services of any kind. If we did that to a child that needed glasses, that would be considered child abuse. But now, because there's a stigma and drugs and all of these other things, and oh God, we can't be doing that. We have to do it twice as good for half the pay because we're Latinos, and that's just not the case. And so I very much think about that all the time. If my kid needed glasses, if my kid needed crutches, if my kid needed a brace, as a parent, I would provide that for them. And I had a very different experience. And I know that some children do not react well to the medication, but there's so many different types of medication because there are different types of presenting ADHD. And there's some that are anxiety. There's some of them that come from trauma. There's some of them are genetic. There's all types of ADHD that come part of it. But if 1/3 of children in the United States are suffering from a mental health disorder and we're not servicing half of them, let's take away the word mental. If 1/3 of the children in the United States are suffering from a health disorder and we are not servicing half of them, would that not then be considered child abuse? Right? That's how I framed my mind around it. And I thought, no, I'm going to do what I got to do for my kids and make sure that they're okay. And this whole thing of the liver and everything else, ADHD kills more people, or people with ADHD die at higher rates because of there's a lot of other health issues that come along with it. Poor diet, impulsivity, all these other things. If you look at people that have ADHD, they die at sooner ages and they die at larger numbers than their counterparts. And so it's a health disorder, mind you, not just a mental health disorder. It plays with a lot of other things. And we can no longer fall prey to the stigma because somebody else says or does whatever. I'm sorry, if my kid needs something, I'm going to do whatever my kid needs. And I did that from the very beginning. And I got so much heck for it. And I thought, screw you. You don't know what I'm doing with my kid at the house. And you don't understand how my oldest son literally took a knife to my couch because he just wanted to see what the couch looked like from the inside. My other kid took a sledgehammer to the wall. My son took apart my entire stove. My other son took apart one of my computers. Like, these are really destructive behaviors that are causing me a lot of money, and it was impulsivity, and I needed to get them on something. If not, they wouldn't. And now on the days if they don't have their medication, they even are like, Mommy, I'm annoying myself, please, don't forget my medication at the pharmacy, and they'll stay on top of it because they can't handle it either. So I just wanted to present a different way, a different outlook for people. And when people approach me like, oh, I don't know if I should put my child on medication, and I said, look, the research is up to you. But I always remind people, like, if your kid needed glasses, are you going to deny them because they might be made fun of? No, you're not. You're providing a service to your child. And we need to get rid of that stigma. And I'm not advocating that every kid needs to be medicated. By all means, you do what you need to do in your family. There's lots of different alternative therapies. But at least as long as you're addressing it, don't think that by denying it or by putting it away or by just telling them to get over it, that's going to happen. It's not. They need interventions, they need the help, and they need people that are advocating for them on all types of levels, and especially in school, because they are getting punished and they're not getting serviced. And it needs to start at home, and we need to start teaching ourselves in the community, parents within the community, to go and say, hey, advocate for your kid. Don't just let the teacher let them get in trouble. This needs to change, right? So, and this is the fighter in me. This is the advocate in me. that comes out pretty strong in the bulldog in me. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
No, that's an excellent share, Andrea and Nicole. I think it's so important for us to really try to get rid of these cultural stigmas that exist, especially in our Latino communities. And it's funny when you were mentioning the glasses analogy, right? And I remember when I first started my mental health journey a long time ago, 10 years ago or so. And the first thing that my therapist said is like, if you got your leg broken, would you just ignore it? It's like, no, of course not, right? And she said, hey, a lot of people are walking around with mentalities and emotions that have been broken. However it occurred, but they don't treat them. Why? Because it's not a physical thing. And it's like you just said right now, if your kid needs glasses, you wouldn't deny your kid glasses. That's maybe there's a stigma there that called four eyes, what they make fun of, but you're not going to deny them that. And I think that's something that us in Latinidad kind of need to work on that, because we definitely are a culture that we pray away things, right? No, pídele a Dios que te ayude. Ask God to help you. Hey, look, I'm a faithful man, but you got to go get some work done too. My broken leg's not gonna get fixed just because I pray about it. But going back to the stigmas again, y'all, this is why it's important to have these conversations, because there are stigmas that happen that occur within Black and Brown communities that don't occur in other communities. And when you're talking about research and you're talking about data and studies that have occurred, remember those policies and all those frameworks have been built primarily based on studies that involved either white men or white folks in general. They weren't involving us. And that's why this particular project is so important, because it is specifically geared towards Black and Brown communities, towards Latinx communities, so we can specifically address those particular portions of our cultures, of our environments, of our particular situations that needs to happen. But in order for that to happen, again, I'm gonna stress it. I'm like a salesman right now. Please click on that link up top. All right, trust me, you're not buying anything. You're not getting sold anything. Your information is not gonna get anywhere. This is all to make work, y'all. This is all to put in action, to actually make something happen, something positive happen for our folks. So check out that form, fill it out. This is to be an interest form for the book that they're writing, that Nicole and Andrea are writing right now. That book right is called Invisible con ADHD: Real Voices, Real Policy for Latino Students. And right now I'm talking to Nicole Biscotti, teacher and an author, as well as Andrea Sanchez Aguirre, who's also a teacher and an author. I want to go ahead and continue. We're going to go for another about 20, 25 minutes or so, y'all. And I definitely want to just bring a couple people up to be respectful of Nicole and Andrea's time. And I'll bring folks up in a little bit if you have a question or you have something that you want to share. But I have a few more questions before we get into that. Um, how why do we need culturally relevant policies? I know we kind of answered that right now, but why specifically when it comes to culturally relevant policies? Why is that so important? And maybe Nicole, could you talk about learning about education in Mexico and maybe compare how it's different to the United States when it comes to this?
Yes, thank you. I'm finding it very interesting to interview teachers here in Mexico. It, it's First of all, it's a more collective culture. And one thing that I'm finding very interesting, I've always felt like we did not do a very good job of supporting the other kids in the classroom. We call it inclusion, that we have kids in the least restrictive environment possible. But it's really, in my mind, not inclusion. It's just that we kind of put everybody together and hope for the best, because there's no support around that. And I found that in at least in Mexico, in the area that I'm at, in Mexicali, I'm seeing that teachers are more willing to have conversations with the class. Like, for example, there was one teacher that had a kid that had sensory issues around noise, and the kid would have breakdowns, meltdowns rather, around noise, and have to leave the room and go with a counselor. So one time when that happened, what this teacher did was he put he had all the kids go in a circle, and then he had a few kids take a turn being in the circle and had the rest of the kids be really loud, and then stop them and then say, okay, what did you hear? And they were like, well, not very much. And how did that feel when everybody was talking at the same time and all that noise was going on? And as he was walking them through that, using that as a learning opportunity, like, okay, so for so and so, that experience of feeling overwhelmed and not being able to manage all those inputs happens at a much lower volume. So really just helping them to understand the other kid's perspective as well, when it was already obvious to them that that child, needed that support. So I find that in a collective culture, there's more support given to the other kids to understand. And then that the teacher was telling me that the other kids were then more willing to kind of remind each other, like, hey, kind of calm down a little bit, because so and so starting to get a little upset now. He doesn't like noise, and just be more of a more supportive environment for that student. So I find that to be really interesting. And then just to really look at, where are we missing the mark in terms of reaching our Latino kids? We know that we're not identifying and supporting them. And we also know that it comes down to communication between the three people that have to come together to make a diagnosis. So where's the communication breakdown between the doctor, the teacher, and the parent? Um, where is that happening? What are the expectations on both sides that differ from culture to culture? And where is that happening? And also, what are the expectations for behavior that are maybe differing from culture to culture, that are also preventing clarity in this area? And also, just kind of on a lighter note, where are we, what are we doing as schools to come together and really relate and connect with our families that are Latino? Because tiene que haber confianza before we can even have these kind of hard conversations about kids and supporting them.
Those are great points, Nicole, and I think that's why it is important to talk about it. There is a lot of fear in many Latinx communities, um, when it comes to trusting somebody and putting in the time and the effort, and also a lot of parents, for example, when it came to my son, I know his mom worked, and sometimes we didn't put the value in those discussions with the teachers at the forefront like we should. And I think it's important, especially if our children do have something that we need to address. For example, my son with his ADHD, and both of y'all with your children. Andrea, can you talk about how culture comes into play in school, both on the collective and the individual level, and why that is so important to address in this book?
Absolutely. So when we have students that are Latino that come to the United States, one of the first things that people think about is translation. And when we translate word for word. And Nicole, who speaks unbelievably beautiful Spanish, um, when 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 you're dealing with translations, sometimes it's not just word for word. Sometimes it's concepts that you're translating, and there's not a general translation for that. But there's also a cultural way that we grew up at home, right, where there's a lot more respect and for authority figures. There's a lot more respect for education process, because those things have not been afforded to many. When we started this room and I introduced myself with all of my last names, Andrea Olga Ortega Gonzalez Guillen Medina Diaz Treviño Sanchez Aguirre, when I introduced myself with that, the reason I introduced myself with that is because there was a lot of people that sacrificed to get me to the point where I can get a master's, to get me to the point where I'm even thinking about getting a doctorate. As a Latina in the United States at this time, that's impressive. And I don't take that for granted, because just in the 1970s, Latinos were barely getting um, available get into banking, credit cards. Women were getting the ability to get houses, right? We cannot take this for granted, that this was not available to a lot of the people before us. And we're looking at this through a cultural lens, and it's not just about translation. And I wish teachers would really understand that the culture does not translate over, and you have to do a lot more digging. a lot of people would think that if I'm in Texas and I go from El Paso to San Antonio, culturally there's not a big difference because it's mostly Mexican Americans. And even I experience a cultural shift moving from El Paso to San Antonio. It's a very different shift. And we have to take that into mind that anytime a student comes over, even if they're just crossing the bridge, right, that there's going to be a cultural shift that comes with it and a cultural perspective that parents have gone through and what they don't know because they think that there's a collective mindset in the American classrooms because this is what they grew up with and what's going to be best for them. And that's not necessarily the case because now we have FERPA and we're so worried about violations. And we are a country that is now in the United States, a country that is deeply ingrained in the idea of self and one person and nobody else needs to know. And so it's a detriment a lot of times to a collective unit. And as a class, you're having to learn all these things, but you can't because you have to legally be doing certain things, which is why for us, we didn't want to just speak on the problems. We didn't just want to kind of showcase what the issues are in cultural relevance. The policy needs to change because it never addresses a cultural bias that comes in teaching students. People think that translation is not enough. You cannot translate culture enough without understanding and getting into there and understanding that there's a collective mindset that comes with it, or there's a different medical mindset that comes with it, or there's a different family mindset that comes with it. All of this wraps around in culture, and it makes a big difference in education and the way that we approach students and the way that students approach learning and approach teachers and approach administration. Thank you.
If I could just say something really quickly there. My fiance, we live in Mexicali. He's Mexican, and we just had a debate the other day because we were talking about like the approach for the beginning of the school year for Jason. And I was like, all right, so I guess I'm going to do the normal, like email all the teachers, set up conferences. And he's like, well, why would you do that and have phone conferences with them? Why don't you just simply go to their classrooms and talk to them? And I was trying to explain to him that usually parents can't just go to a classroom. I can only do that because I'm an employee of the district. And it's considered kind of rude and intrusive. And he really didn't understand that. Like he was looking at me like kind of thinking I was being dramatic. And I'm like, no, like you don't understand. Like parents, teachers do not expect parents to just walk in the classroom. And he's like, well, you have to talk about your child. Like this is a face-to-face discussion. And I'm like, okay, I get it because you want to have a face-to-face discussion because Hispanics, we love face-to-face discussions. And I would love to have a face-to-face discussion with them. But that's something that needs to be arranged through an email. And he's like, an email, but this is not an email conversation. And we went back and forth, but the bottom line is that even that, he really didn't see discussing Jason's accommodations as an email discussion.
It's it's different. It's just so different how different parents in the same household can approach things like that, right? And I think that just kind of speaks to why it's important to communicate and have a good solid footing when it comes to dealing with these type of issues. To Andrea's point regarding children coming in, I used to be a teacher. I was a paraprofessional first and then a teacher in special education, and they would bring me in for the meetings, for sped meetings, to translate, and I was completely unqualified, woefully inept when it came to it. At the time, I didn't realize that. I just felt like I could just translate, and I felt like I was helping. But when in fact I wasn't helping, I was actually probably not sharing the information properly and not using the proper terminology. And those are some of the challenges that our black and brown kids face when they come up in an environment that maybe English is not the primary language. It's basically a privilege at that point, because if they don't have the proper translation, if they don't have the right information, they can't make the right decisions for their kids. Instead, you have, a goofball like me, just doing his best, right? And I feel like I can give a good translation. But like Andrea said, there's specific terminology. There's specific words that you need to use, and the understanding of that, and that can all get lost in context if someone is not properly translating that. So those are one of many of the cultural differences there that need to be addressed when it comes to ADHD and those frameworks and the policies that are going to be built that are going to help our kids, specifically our Latinx, Latino kids that need this help. Because right now they're not being diagnosed properly and instead they're falling in the cracks. And that's just why Andrea and Nicole have taken on the task of making sure that they write this book and get it out there. The upcoming book is called Invisible con ADHD: Real Voices, Real Policy for Latino Students. The way that you can help is by filling out the form on the top. Again, this form is not a marketing scheme. It's not some sign you up for, some MLM or something like that. This is a legit form, a legit call to action that's going to lead to actual results. You're going to be helping families. You're going to be helping kids. You're going to be helping our system, our cultura advance, because our kids are actually going to have a framework and our teachers are going to have a framework that they can base actual decisions, policy, and structures for their kids. I want to thank Nicole and Andrea just for the time spent, and hopefully you have a few more minutes so we can go ahead and just get some more value and input from some of the folks that have been listening in and who want to share and add to the conversation. I want to welcome Belinda and Heather. Thank y'all so much for being here. Belinda, I've noticed you active in the chat and you've been participating, and you also filled out the form. Can you confirm that we don't like sell, like, I don't know, protein shakes or anything like that?
Mira, 1000%, those who speak Spanglish, English, yes. And
Okay.
it's so funny because I do follow Andrea, and I'm going to follow everybody, the other Amatsu, and a lot of people I see down there. I try to ping in my Latino friends, even like, what do you call it? Messaging them if they're paused notifications. No, it is just a form basically asking you, your name, how to best contact you, and whether or not you were diagnosed with ADHD. I think from best I can remember, no sales, no pitches, no nothing. So 100% yes. And I just want to say thank you, Rodrigo, Nicole, Andrea, for holding this room, because as a Latina, I find myself, well, first of all, I'm in my garage right now. So real quick, I'll just say, because you can tell the ADHD is like, pew, and meds are nothing right now. So there is nothing right now. Mostly it's, for ADHD, especially in the mornings during the day, because I'm on the East Coast of the US. I am a first-gen immigrant from South America. But what else? And I'm married to a white a male. So we do have those stigmas, and it's been very difficult, very, very difficult. The system I'm in Florida. I try to be private, so I use my single name, but I am very TMI because I'm very honest, and that is also part of the diagnoses. But basically, my main thing is to let everybody out there that feels like they're the only ones going through this. You're not. There are resources. There are people. I have found a tribe here on Clubhouse, because in the town I live in, it's mostly honestly white upper class people that live here. And if I find one person that speaks Spanish, like this morning I was at Publix and this guy had this Doberman, and I noticed he had a Latino accent. So I'm like, where are you from? He's like, well, I'm from here. I'm like, well, okay, what's your ethnicity? Excuse me. Oh, I'm Cubano. And so of course I started practicing. So you're not alone. And there is help, there is guidance. We have here Rodrigo, Nicole, Andrea, the amazing project they're doing. So I urge you all to please fill out the interest form, because that's all it is. It's an interest form. And then they'll go from there and decide who, I guess, they want to go forward with in the project. So it's not a sales pitch or anything. But thank you so much for inviting me up. And I don't want to take up too much of anybody else's time. You can read my bio. My son, I consider late diagnosis. It took a while because in kindergarten, first grade, they started noticing, the teacher asked me to go to the pediatrician. It was a long fight. I have a brother who is deaf. That's why we moved to the United States when I was 6 years old, to California, which in the 80s, which was more progressive than Florida. Let's see, what else? And then it turned out that my son was actually also diagnosed with autism and generalized anxiety disorder. In my son, I saw a lot of myself as a child, a lot of similarities. So I started talking to people. My background is in psychology. I worked in the social services as a professional advocate, so worked with many different cultures. Mostly what I saw was people of color, Latino and Black, mostly in my work. And unfortunately, when I had my son, autism was just starting to come out of the woodwork. And so I kind of missed the boat within the social services field with that. But I do plan on going back my master's, specifically school psychology, because what's happening, and it actually even happened to me recently, when you ask for even a basic ADHD, don't even get me started on autism, but even basic ADHD, they're like, have you ever tried to, have you ever had thoughts of suicidal ideations or even tried to? And if you answer yes, certain doctors will label you, diagnose you as bipolar 2 and try to give you all this medication. And I'm speaking from a personal experience. I was shocked. It was almost like an experiment. I asked for an ADHD eval from my son's psychiatrist's office. It was a physician assistant because his psychiatrist, who is amazing and well versed in ADHD and autism, was on an extended vacation. He lives in India. And I almost fell over because I had heard about this happening, but I hadn't experienced it. I have a therapist. She's like, "Oh my God, you're totally ADHD. What are you talking about? I mean, there's no way you're bipolar." So this is happening, and this lady happened to be white, and I do think that there definitely is culture implications. And what Rodrigo was talking about within our culture also, when I worked at the child protection team in Tampa, we had people from the rural area, Mexican rural area, people from a rural area who were Mexican and spoke a complete different dialect than the Peruvian Hispanic that I speak. So that was imagine that. I mean, imagine how those children would. The parents couldn't even, and this was working with sexual assault, child victims of sexual assault, and it was they had to bring their interpreter to try to speak to me in Spanish and to try to interpret back to them. So luckily, we use a lot of hand signals as well, and the child could as well. But I couldn't even imagine with something as that extreme, even with the system nowadays. Now, my son, because I am married to an Irish Italian man, my son looks more white, more European. So, I teach him, you have a privilege because of your look. Now he's not blonde, he has brown hair and hazel eyes, but I'm more olive than he is. And he's like, "Mommy, I'm going to use my privilege to help others." And I'm like, "Yes, because that's what we have to do, no matter what tone, but yes, this is the reality of the world." He probably, it was hard though. It was very, very hard. Our last name is Italian. My maiden name here is Spanish. But just again, you're not alone. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm trying my best as I can to to answer DMs or messages on Instagram. Please, I'm not ignoring you if you don't hear from me. But I do hold a regular room if you do want to speak to me on Mondays. Just click on my bio. It's called Neurodivergence Assemble. It's not to plug myself. It's just to let people know that that's where I'm going to be on Mondays. 11 a.m. Eastern. So if you want to speak to me directly, because I'm terrible. I have ADHD, anxiety, and I was diagnosed as autistic at age 50 by a psychotherapist, but because she's in another state, it doesn't count here in Florida, so I'd have to look for a neuropsych. So that's my crazy. Everything that you've all talked about, I probably fit into every single box. Immigrant, check. Group with brother disability, check. Son, ADHD, check. Myself, check. All that stuff. And you can even tell by speaking with me. So, but you know what? This is how it is. Again, my husband asked me to respect privacy, and I do as best as possible. To the point that on my Instagram, I speak more about chronic illness because that's what brought me to Instagram. But I'll do stories where I share more about neurodivergency and such things. And I'm on some podcasts and things going on in the line. So I'm always happy to help. Thank you so much, Rodrigo, Nicole, Andrea. I've taken up enough time. Thank you again. I appreciate it. I'm complete.
No, Belinda, we appreciate you sharing your room because that's what we need. We need more resources, and you were one of the first ones to fill out the form. So definitely, you get to go ahead and plug your room there. So
Yeah, I know.
we
Thank you. I'm
appreciate
sorry
you
about
being
that.
part of
Just
it.
wanted, if anybody wanted
No, no,
directly,
no, no, no,
I'm
no, no.
hard
I
to
say
pin
that in jest.
down. I'm hard to pin down
No,
unless you text me or
you're good to
WhatsApp
go.
me.
No, you're good to go.
Thank
And I
you.
definitely
Thank you so
encourage
much.
y'all, for another resource, go ahead and follow Belinda and follow her into that room, because that's what we need, folks. We need folks to make sure that they know there are folks out there with our stories, and we need to share them. But again, like Belinda, fill out that form, y'all. That form up top. We want to make sure that we get a good response, and that Nicole and Andrea can do this work. And the only way they can do that is by gathering stories, those experiences, and having these interviews. Even if you don't think you fit in the category, fill it in. Maybe you have a family member that could fill it in. Fill it in on their behalf. Write down your name and stuff. Talk to Andrea, talk to Nicole, and maybe we can get in touch with your family member or a friend or whoever it is, so we can get these experiences down on paper. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do this work, we're going to end up with the same stuff that's out there, y'all. Andrea and Nicole won't be able to complete this book, and we're going to have to rely on the same studies, on the same research papers, on the same frameworks and curriculums and structures that frankly don't reflect us right now. And that's why Nicole and Andrea are doing this work right now, and having really the capacity to write this book. And we really appreciate that they're going to be doing this work, because our community needs it. And that book is called Invisible, on ADHD: Real Voices, Real Policy for Latino Students. Again, Belinda, thank you so much for sharing. Unless Nicole and Andrea had something they wanted to add, I can go ahead and go to Heather. Did y'all want to chime in with anything? Or if not, yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
I came on here and I just wanted to say that, um, like Aida down in the listening, mezzanine, and Belinda, finding other women during the pandemic that were diagnosed, or were going through that with their children, having that touchstone, it it dramatically changed it. And Belinda, I want to thank you so much for coming in here, because you do such wonderful work here on the app, and you're always sharing information, and you're so faithful to that. And I just want to thank you to that. And I just say that in listening to that, and honoring people like that, and finding other people to share that experience with, has been transformational. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, Belinda, for sharing, and Aida also for indulging me in those conversations as well. Over to you, Rodrigo.
Thank you for that, Andrea. Thank you so much, and definitely appreciate whenever we connect and we're able to talk about our experiences and share and find community. That's really the most important part. And Andrea and Nicole are fantastic at doing that. In fact, it was Nicole who reached out to me one time when we appeared on a radio show talking about this, and she said, "Hey, no, you know what? You have a great story." And I was like, "No, your story is fun. Well, I need you to come up here, and we need to do this and this and that." That's what building community is. It's about really connecting with folks, and hopefully expanding our stories so that they reach out to other folks, and we can talk about this, and honestly remove the stigma. If we keep talking about these things, if I talk about it, if Andrea talks about Belinda, there might be somebody out there that says like, man, okay, maybe this is not that bad, or maybe I shouldn't think this way, or maybe I do need to rethink this approach that I have with my kids right now, because I needed to have that talk. And it wasn't until somebody took a vested interest in me and said, like, hey, you're actually doing more damage to your kid than you think. And then I started really investigating it. That's how we move on. That's how we progress from these stigmas. So, again, thank you for building community, Belinda. And of course, Nicole and Andrea. I want to go ahead. We're going to be wrapping up the room pretty soon. But I do see Heather and Aida that are on stage. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but I'll definitely correct that if I need to in a little bit. Heather, you are on stage. Heather, what did you want to share?
Thank you so much. And I want to share a lot. That's why I have to write things down. So I can start off that ADHD. With ADHD, I was recently diagnosed in May. Of course, something major happened that made me kind of go through this process. But I just want to comment, just first of all, thank you so much for just having this room, having this discussion. I've been thinking this about a lot, and it makes me really happy to hear about this, especially with regard to the Latino community, because it's not really talked much about, and a lot of the patterns we think it's normal, or it's not, even that goes to the point of like just impulsive shopping that seems sometimes funny, but it's not. It's like part of ADHD. And but I can go into that in a second. But I just want to say thank you for having this room. It makes me feel like normal. And I just want to start off saying that, you know, ADHD looks different upon everyone. As y'all mentioned, thank you for mentioning that whatever has been research was conducted has been based on white males. It's not reflected on us, especially as women, because that's research is recently new. I remember reading in school that ADHD mostly impacts boys. So I remember reading that thinking, okay, I never have to worry about this. But no, it looks different, and it looks different on women too. And so, you know, I just always knew that I felt odd. I just didn't know like what that meant. And for me, it looked like being shy, speaking too fast, because sometimes because you're so shy, you have so much anxiety, what happens is that you try to make up for it by just talking because you have like a lot, which can be an excessive, or maybe you're just talking too fast because you have racing thoughts, because I have racing thoughts nonstop. And it's like that's not normal. And the thing about it, sometimes you procrastinate. You know, sometimes I realize that I also too, people always dismissed I had it because I had good grades, but people never saw that I had to work twice as hard. It was like 10 times as hard. Sometimes I had to I have to actually, to this day, I have to coach myself to get into working, especially with reports. So I would stay up sometimes for grad school. I wouldn't sleep because I had to reread the same page 1,000 times because I couldn't focus. I would just have to just drink as much caffeine. And also I got into a car accident before. I never really share this, but because I was just changing the radio and I wasn't paying attention, I ran out of yellow light and I missed red stop signs. Like, this is a problem. Like this is a serious problem. And talking about this, removing the stigma, knowing that just like wearing glasses is really helpful, because that's what helped me also talk about other people, because other people, like as an adult, they try to be, because as you know, instead of talking as kids, people might think you might be ashamed of your kid, but as an adult, it's like, to me, I feel like it's harder getting diagnosed, because it's like they think that you lived your entire life into this moment, you're fine. And my friends are trying to be supportive. I'm like, no, you're not being supportive. They're trying to tell me you don't need it. It's like, no, like I literally miss stop signs. I literally get distracted on the road. I literally have anxiety driving, some anxiety all the time. And I messed up at my work. I thought I was gonna like lose my job. Like, this is not something that someone should live with. And because I portrayed this as normal, doesn't make me normal. So it's just really important to address. And once you see this and get help, like my anxiety is just wiped out. I never felt happier my entire life. And to realize that all this things that made me feel like strange or weird, that this was just something that is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it was like the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, because I never felt happier in my entire life. And if anyone's scared or nervous, just consult with a psychiatrist and a therapist, because a therapist can help you with behaviors. A psychiatrist can help you with the medication. Or just consult with them, talk to them, because I was nervous with the medicine, but I had a really great relationship with my psychiatrist. And I contacted him virtually. He was responsive. He reassured me that he's doing the right steps, and don't go into it emotionally, because if they go to it emotionally, like I was just had a breakdown. They tried to diagnose me with like depression because that's what they have to do. So just be careful when you go in emotionally. That's why I go in. If you're feeling all over the place, please go with a therapist and psychiatrist so you can feel support in all the ways. And now I talk about it with my family and my peers, because it's to normalize this. And now as I talk more about it, the more they see it, the more they understand it. And then now they're more supportive to me, because you shouldn't have to go through this alone. And now I feel supported with my work too. And they're very understanding. And so my whole life has just changed. So if you're ever questioning this, please look into this. You're not alone. This is the light in the end of the tunnel. There's tons of new medication out there. I didn't think I would be good in the stimulant kind. I thought I would be like extra hyper, but my life has slowed down, which is the most ironic part. Those things that you see people react on television, it's just all media. And maybe this happens to people who don't need or misdiagnosed. It's like completely different. So just please don't associate with those things that you see on TV. It's way different. It's what medicine has been the most helpful thing. And then especially for children, if you dismiss it as a child, it's going to be way harder to get diagnosed as an adult, because they always ask me, now, like, oh, like, were you diagnosed as a kid? And because I said no, they just wanted to deny me to the end of the day just because I wasn't diagnosed as a child. And it was the most frustrating thing to defend myself. But then I also but I also responded back. I was like, well, women wasn't diagnosed back then. So how can I be diagnosed if it wasn't believed to be diagnosed? That's what I told them. Because it's true. That's my wittiness coming back. I'm just letting you know this is one benefit of getting help for your child now, because if you don't do it now, it could be harder for them as an adult. Because I had to battle through so much to get here, but I'm so happy to be here, and I just want to share that. And thank you for so much, and I'll pass the mic off.
Oh my God, Heather, I'm tearing up over here. You had so many good shares. You had, man, when you said you felt seen, that really touched my heart. I remember when my son finally had some clarity in his life, and he said something very similar. He said, man, I feel like I can think now. And to me, it really put everything into perspective and how important it was to get my son those resources. And so when you say that, and you know, you're sharing and you've been very vulnerable, and I appreciate you for doing that, because there are folks out there that may be struggling with these things, but they don't tackle them because they feel there's a stigma, or they've been told like, oh, just work it out or do this or do that. And you've proven you're a walking embodiment of healing that's going on right now, and the way you just express yourself and talked about that experience. Thank you so much. And you better fill out that form.
Oh, I did. I
Okay.
did. I don't mind talking about it, but it's been the best thing. I've literally cried in the car because I didn't know I had anxiety driving. I was like, this is the first time I don't remember a time driving without anxiety. I cried because I could just drive happily without racing thoughts. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is how people live life. This is why people love road trips. I like road trips.
Oh my God, that's so amazing. And thank you so much, Heather, for sharing, because people need to hear that. They really do. Especially folks like myself at another time when I was against this, when I was thinking that I shouldn't get my son medication, or I need to do this instead of that, or whatever. I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice because we don't consider alternatives beyond our perspective. And your share is just powerful and amazing. Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing. Before I go on, Nicole, Andrea, did you want to chime in very quickly, or if not, I can go ahead and keep moving. If not, not a problem. I do want to respect y'all's time. I know we had initially said roughly around 8:15 to 8:30, but folks have come up, and this has been such a great room, and I appreciate both of y'all for sticking around and for making sure that we get all of our voices heard. So thank you so much for sticking around. With that said, though, I want to pass the mic off to Miss Coria Jackson. I definitely skipped your name, but no, I'm going to do it right here. I'll say Aida. Yes, did I get it right?
Yes,
Aida.
Aida.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Thank you so
Yay!
much. Thank you so much for coming on the stage. What do you want to add to the conversation so far, and what value do you want to bring?
So I'm going to try my best because also I also have ADHD. I was not necessarily diagnosed as a kid. I was diagnosed by the school. My mom came and told me years later that they had said that I had a handicap. That's what she said that they told her, that I was always daydreaming, that I couldn't focus, I wasn't finishing my work. And I just, as a kid, I didn't like that word. And so I was determined not to have this quote unquote handicap. And because my mom, um, didn't want me stigmatized, she kind of helped me. I could so relate to Belinda and Heather. So I'm going to do my best to try to stay focused, because as you guys were talking, I just got more and more excited. And I was like, okay, stay focused, girls, stay focused. But the long story short is that, I really worked hard in school, and just as Heather was saying, I worked so hard that they just thought I was a really bright student, but they just didn't know how hard it was for me to stay a straight A student. And I would be like a straight A student for the first quarter, and then fail the second and third quarter, and then go right back to being an A student again in the fourth quarter. It was just a lot of that growing up. And it wasn't until I got to college that it really hit that this I was struggling. So I really I tried several times to finish college and I never did. So for me, listening to all the stories, I just really feel like I told Andrea the first time I met Andrea, she had a room for ADHD adults. And so I feel like I finally found my tribe. I can, like listening to the ladies talk, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they talk like me. It's just so wonderful. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, what I wanted to share was that I am an neurodivergent. I have four neurodivergent daughters, and unfortunately, I was afraid of them being stigmatized too. So I didn't really push for them to get diagnosed, for them to get the help they needed. They were also very bright. So I have one that's still finishing up school, which I'm trying to push for now. But I didn't realize, like, just listening to some of the other, um, like one of my daughters had the behavioral, the one that you were just saying, Andrea, with the authority, I just read it and I just lost it. But she had that when she was in school. And, I just didn't realize that all of these things were related. And like I said, because I didn't want them to be stigmatized, I really just pushed for them to just push harder, to try harder. I tried other ways for them to keep their homework done. I became like partners in getting things done. But now that they're all adults, we talk about it. Like, oh yeah, now because now people are talking about it, we can say. And I'm also a teacher. I'm a professor at a university, and I teach equity, inclusion, and diversity with a heavy emphasis on working with neurodivergent students. So now I could talk to them like, listen, this is what's going on. This is what people are trying to do. But I really honestly, and if anyone is listening and you have a child, I honestly wish I had pushed when they were younger and I didn't worry about the stigma. And now listening to the ladies, I'm like, I just looked over at my husband. I said, I'm going to go see a psychologist and a psychiatrist because I need the medication. Because now that I'm an adult and an older adult, it is so glaringly obvious where my struggles are that I realize now I need help. So thank you, ladies, for sharing, and thank you all for this room.
Thank you so much. These stories and how everybody's been sharing what they've been through and what they're dealing with, how they have grown to become who they are. It's a beautiful thing to see. But the common thing I keep hearing right now in all these stories is that, well, I didn't know where to go, or I never was told, or I had to search for certain things. And I think it just goes to show for the need for something like this, and not just data wise, right? We've already proven that there is a need for this for our black and brown kids, our communities that need this. We've already proven that. But when you hear these stories, it personifies it. It really humanizes that need and why we need this. It's not just data and it's not numbers. It's real human life experiences that are happening out there, and we want to support that. And when you hear Nicole talk about her son, when you hear about Andrea and her and Heather, Belinda, I mean, everybody has an experience with this, and we've all tackled it differently, and that's why it's so important that we share these stories and that we continue this advocacy work. I see you on mic, Aida. Did you want to share something else?
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to share, especially because the reason I wanted to come up here also was because I didn't know, Andrea, until you shared that you didn't know until you were an adult. And what I was thinking is, I wish someone had noticed something in me years and years ago, because as a Latina and growing up in, although I was born here in the States and so were my parents, we were very Puerto Rican. Okay, we are very Latino, and you know for a Latina mamas, now I know, like looking back, I'm like, mommy had it too. But we were taught, because especially as the oldest girl, like, you're being lazy, you're this, you're the other thing. Like, you're supposed to be a certain way as a Latina female. And if you're not like that, like, my room was always a mess. And, I really got so much slack for that. But now I'm looking back and going, oh my gosh, this is all a part of this diagnosis. It was all a part of it. And if we had already gotten, if we had gotten the help, if my mother had gotten the help, and we could have stepped away from culture for a moment, I think about all the kids that are out there, but I think about the parents that are going to need support too, that may also be dealing with this and struggling with this. So that's what comes to my mind.
Rodrigo, may I share something, Nicole and Jared, just real quick, because I know Aida mentioned having we're talking about psychologists.
Yeah, yeah, no,
I'm
no problem. Very, very
the one
quickly, and
thing
then
I
I'll talk
wanted to
to
mention,
Nicole.
yes, I want to mention just real quick to be very, because I shared my story about what happened when I did it, like an experiment, so to speak, with this physician's assistant at my son's psychiatrist office. I would look into, and this is what I get from other parents, the tribe that I found here, look into a neuropsychological will, like a standard psych test can diagnose, yes, but a neuropsychological can specify the origin. I'm reading this just so you could understand the severity, development of the condition. I'm not even going to say disorder, the condition, and customized recommendations. So that what we took our son to UF, University of Florida, to get his psychological evaluation. But it's just take only, you know, the more information you have, the more research you can. And I know it sounds like a lot, so that's why I say come to these spaces, join us, learn from us, because that's how I learned, and I made the decision that eventually, once I'm able to, I'm going to be going for a neuropsych, just because of my multiple conditions, not just ADHD, but we're talking generalized anxiety disorder as well as potentially, well, I mean, I can say autistic if I was in California, but here in Florida, technically I can't. So just, I wanted to, put that information out there. Do your research, because I did an experiment and I was the lady, I'm like, oh yeah, I want an ADHD. And this is, telehealth. I'd like an ADHD eval. She's like, well, she asked me like a couple of questions. She's like, I think you're bipolar too, and I'm gonna give you sleep medication and this medication, this medication. I was like, I don't think. And I confirmed with my therapist. I'm like, okay, this is what I was told. What do you think? She's like, no freaking way. So just informative. The more information you have, the more research you can do. Come to these rooms, ask for information, ask questions, the better. So just wanted to put that out there because that is why I'm going back to grad school, so that these girls are not misdiagnosed or undiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or not diagnosed at all, and boys as well, of course. So, and I'm also looking to work with the deaf population because my brother is I have a brother who is deaf. That's how he likes to be that's how he identifies, excuse me. But just want to put that out there. That you have the psychiatric, you have a psychological, and you have a neuropsychological. So just make sure which one you're going to go to, and preferably go to a Latina. Look through your insurance or look through your community for a Latina evaluator as well, because that would, I think, would also make a huge difference. That's what I plan on doing. So that's why I'm taking my old sweet time with this. Thank you so much again. I'm complete for now. Thank you. Oh, not for now, for tonight. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you, and thank you, Linda, for sharing. I just wanted to say I really appreciate all of you that have shared so honestly and been had the courage to be so vulnerable and so have such integrity with everything that you're telling us. It helps so much as a parent to hear your shares. It helps so much as an educator to hear your shares. And I think that every time you share your experience with another person, you are helping to break that stigma. And I just, when I wrote my book, I do not have a background in special education. I'm a Spanish teacher. I think we all probably have self doubt to some degree, or maybe some of you are lucky and don't, but I know I do. And sometimes, there was some days where I felt, down on myself as a mother, as a teacher. Things, have not always gone great with Jason in school. Matter of fact, a lot of times they went really badly. I'm thinking, what right do I have to write this? What right do I have to be speaking? Or what right do I have to go to this talk that, people are paying me to give? And then somebody would send me a message and say, thank you for sharing about what you're going through because it helped me to understand what I'm going through. So I just really wanted to thank you all for sharing. And I just want to encourage you to please continue to share wherever you feel safe and comfortable to do so. And I just want you to know how much it means and how valuable it is, not only to people that it resonates with, but also because you're adjusting the lens of so many of us educators out there and people like me that are parenting people with ADHD that don't have ADHD. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. And you're absolutely right about that. It's important that we continue sharing these spaces and being there supportive for each other, because sometimes it could be a little bit daunting. I mean, we've heard some stories here where folks were battling it on their own, and it shouldn't be a battle. It should be more of, managing and taking care of yourself and doing this and doing that. But because of the stigmas within our community, because of our own cultural upbringings, and because the way the structures are built, we sometimes don't have that opportunity. So it
Wait,
is important to make sure we have community. Go ahead.
and just one more thing, Rodrigo. People are battling, and just to be really blunt about this, kids are getting spanked every day because they're getting reports from school that embarrass their parents. Kids are getting grounded, kids are getting their recess taken away. And even before those punishments are happening, kids with ADHD receive so many negative internal messages about themselves all day long. Why can't you just sit still? Nunca está quieto. ¿Qué es lo que te pasa? Te lo he dicho un millón de veces. I mean, on and on and on. And I really think that history is going to look back and find that we, were, as a society, are pretty abusive to children that are neurodivergent. But it's our ignorance. It's just our ignorance. So every time you guys are sharing, you're helping to battle that ignorance, quite frankly.
Absolutely right, Nicole. And that's what I meant by battling. We're not battling ourselves, right? We're managing ourselves. But the battle is with other folks that unfortunately are ignorant, myself included at one point. I was battling my own ego, my own pride, and so forth. We have one last person who has come up on stage. I definitely appreciate Nicole and Andrea's time. I know we're going to end at the top of the hour, but I wanted to honor that request. Yahuda, I see that you've joined the stage, and hopefully I said your name right. If not, please educate me. I got no problem being corrected. But please add some value to the stage. I will ask to keep it short if possible. But let's go ahead and finish up strong here with this discussion when it comes to this ADHD and Latino communities, and what we're doing to with the project and the link that we have up there and whatnot. Feel free to share.
Absolutely. Peace, love, light, and protection, Rodrigo. You're having a great panel. I definitely want to touch bases on ADHD, this central nervous system that it affects. We got, just to sum it up, you got your hypothalamus gland, pituitary gland, and your pineal gland. And the main thing dealing with ADHD is this thing blocks calcium from getting inside pretty much the brain. So calcium is one of the main building blocks you need, plus iron phosphate. So when we're dealing with ADHD and all the medicine they're giving us is very acidic and it's literally slowing us down. So I would suggest, since your pituitary gland produces zinc, copper, and gold, we need to feed it natural things so it can keep producing zinc, copper, and gold to feed the rest of the organs in the body. So when we focus on our endocrine system, brain, nerve, and adrenal glands, these things are all connected. And there's certain herbs with the proper frugivore lifestyle that can really change this. I think your environment is the key to healing. So in the Afro-Latino community, I've noticed that, you like to clean. You want to see everything clean. Use the Clorox bleach, the Febreze, and this stuff is full of aluminum that blocks calcium from getting inside the brain. Only way to get this out is through the glymphatic system. That's the water that surrounds your brain that eliminates proteins and solubles. So when we cleanse the glymphatic system and the lymphatic system in the body, this is literally how you heal from ADHD, schizophrenia. I've seen some brain dead patients come back. As soon as you cleanse that glymphatic system, everything will regulate and go back to normal. But it's a specific way to do it. We got to get rid of the parasites, the yeast, the fungus, mold, the candida at the body. We got to get rid of all these chemicals we're cleaning with. Bubblegum has rat poison in it, so we can't chew bubblegum. We got to change that shower filter head every 6 months so we won't be bathing in over 20 chemicals. Get the right soap, the right toothpaste, toothbrush. Start using
Yahuda,
key lime for
I'm so
deodorant.
sorry.
I'm
I'm
so
going to go
sorry.
ahead
Oh, go
and
ahead, sorry.
interrupt you right here. Yahuda, I totally get where you're coming from, and I appreciate um, coming into the conversation, but I want to redirect it and go back to the discussion at hand. You're getting into medicine, into things that we are not well versed in. And while you bring in the value to this, I think it's a whole different conversation that we might need to have. And I believe me, from a granddaughter of a curandera, I get everything that you're saying, but it's different for everybody. And so I want to go back to the conversation of us going into the fact that we're trying to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. And we're trying to advocate for our students, and we're trying to make sure that Latinos get in there, whether it's medicine, whether it's vitamins, whatever it is out there for anybody that's here. I want to go back and reiterate that what we're doing today and interviewing people and interviewing for all these things and coming back into this forum and getting as many testimonies as possible about what the experience was, what we're really doing is we're quantifying qualitative data, because that is how to change policy. And so we're playing by the white man rules to change the narrative for Latino students from now into the future. And I want to go back to that because, Yahuda, I believe that what you're saying, you're probably right. It has to do a lot. I know that magnesium plays a lot with my child's, but I'm not a doctor and I'm not well versed in that. And we cannot end on that kind of a note. So I'm so sorry, but thank you very much for the value that you bring. Back to you, Rodrigo.
Oh, excuse me. And I would just like to add that if you're interested, we would love to hear your story. So please fill out an interest form.
No, I agree. When it comes to these types of issues, it's multifaceted, right? And so it's really important that we do have these conversations, but I also want to make sure that we have the conversations within the context that we have that we understand. And so when it comes to those types of whether it's diet or whether this and that, I'm definitely not the expert on that. Even to this topic, I'm not the expert on that. That's why I do have the experts, Nicole and Andrea, here to discuss that, to talk about the frameworks that are existing right now and what we can do to that. So I definitely value everybody and the contributions that they have, but I definitely want to make sure that we do stay focused on the main crux of the topic right now, which is how are we going to change the stigma? How are we going to change these structures and these frameworks regarding ADHD and how they affect our brown and black kids, our black and brown kids, when it comes to simple things like getting in trouble, right? Simple things like not getting good grades and focus and reading and all that stuff. I think that's right. It's really critical to make sure that we do have that conversation, and we've had an excellent conversation. It's been 2 hours now, and we've been speaking on this. And I just want to thank everybody that's been here. I really want to push one last time the importance of this interest form and why we're doing that. We just had the discussion. We're ending the room soon, and now it's an action, right? We a lot of times we have a discussion here on Clubhouse, everybody talking and this and that, but there's no action, there's no follow through, there's no follow up. There's a follow up here, y'all. There's a follow through. Even if you think it may not be applicable, or maybe you've already filled it out, take it to another community, take it with somebody else, forward it to your friends, forward it to the folks that you feel are going to benefit from this, because we need as expansive of a reach as possible when it comes to this forum, because these experiences, these stories, these narratives are missing right now. And you just heard right now from so many, not just from Nicole, Andrea, and myself, but you also heard from Belinda, from Aida, from also from Heather, and I'm sure other folks that were in the chat that were talking about this and how they grew up and how they went through their experience. And we need those stories. We in order for this project to be successful, we need those stories, and we need to make sure that we understand why the current system is not working and why we need another way of doing this. And that's why it's so important that we do have this conversation, particularly regarding this book, Invisible con ADHD: Real Voices, Real Policy for Latino Students. That is the upcoming book from authors Andrea Sanchez Aguirre and Nicole Biscotti, who are both teachers and ADHD advocates and advocates for students in general. These two ladies are badasses, y'all. Please follow them, okay? I say that humbly. I say that with all the respect, but I admire the work that they've done, and they've proven it too. Okay, y'all, they've been on the front lines, and they prove it with the sacrifices that they've made for their careers, for their kids, for themselves. But really, they're doing this out of love and passion for la comunidad. And so we need to support them. We need to support our Latinas. We need to support our women that are out there doing this work, because it needs to get done. So please follow them, fill out that form, go onto their socials, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter, whatever they're asking you to follow and share, do it, because we need this to happen. We need to make sure that we have these resources for all of our kids out there. With that said, we have been here for 2 hours. I'm definitely going to start wrapping up the room now. I'm going to go ahead and give our moderators, Andrea and Nicole, some parting words, whatever they want to finish this off with. It's been a fantastic discussion. I want to thank Belinda and Aida, who are still here on stage. I also want to thank all the audience members. Heather was here on stage as well, but she's back in the audience. Daniel, Dr. Latanya, Joel, Curious, Alan, Ken, as well as Dr. JS. Thank y'all so much for hanging with us. There's been a bunch of other people that have come in. We had over 100 folks stroll into the room, y'all, and this will be on the replays as well. Share the replay, y'all. This was a great conversation. Some great points, resources were shared, stories were told. I mean, these are the type of rooms that I live for here on Clubhouse. This is the Amigos platform. We have one thing that is our mantra. That is the one thing that guides all of our rooms, and that's that we elevate the community. And this room right here is elevating the community, and I love it. And I thank y'all for being here with us. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass on the mic to Andrea for any final words before we start shutting down the room. Or Nicole, doesn't matter.
Thank you so much for that. No, sorry. I was fielding some questions in the DMs, but um, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I came into this room and I asked Rodrigo, "Hey, can we facilitate this conversation with Nicole? We're trying to get a lot more interviews, and we as Latinos, whenever there's a project that comes out, we're always crying about visibility." And that we are not, one conglomerate. We are a diaspora, and we are really trying to make sure that we do this in a culturally relevant way, with fidelity to the diaspora that is Latino, the Latino community. And, uh, the simple things such as going back on Hispanic or Latinx or Latino or Mexican American, or the titles that come with it. The cultural relevance, the studies that we're doing, making sure that we are looking up culturally relevant researchers and looking up peer-reviewed things. And so we're navigating within this framework of academia, and we're bringing it here. And we want to bring it to the tios and the tias and the abuelitas and the abuelos and the moms and the dads and the children too, and the students. And we really want to represent the community. And so to have 111 people come in, to have 21 people sharing it, to have people clipping this, to have this much conversation, this much chat, this much going back and forth, this much sharing and vulnerability in this room, has really struck something in me. And today, I submitted what is the very first part of the process for my doctoral candidacy, and I am wanting to get my doctorate in education leadership and policy. And this is the main thing that I want to study, and this is what drives me and fuels me. And it is this room and these conversations, like Rodrigo said, that are a big motivator, because we need that representation for our community, and I want to be part of that solution. And I know that Nicole is, I could not be better situated than to have met Nicole, and she said yes, and then she is just all around amazing. As a speaker, if you guys have a school and you want somebody to come in and lead some professional development, I mean, her professional development is stellar, and she does this with such grace, and then she can do it in Spanish too, because she brings it like that. So can I. But to have somebody and a touchstone like that, and then to have Rodrigo come in and say, yes, I'm going to help you and I'm going to facilitate this for you, what could I do, without hesitation. Rodrigo, thank you so much for your help. Thank you for the vulnerability on this space. And thank you for sharing your journey with your sons and with yourself, and really uh, the conversations that we're wanting to have, and the voices that we want to exemplify in this book surround a lot of the mentality that you are so willing to share with us. Y te quiero dar las gracias, sinceramente. So, good night to everybody. Thank you for the conversation, and I hope to stay in contact. Please, if you have any questions, if you want to DM me, if you want to get into the interest forum, however it is, I'm best reachable on Twitter. I respond really well on there. I don't on Instagram, and here I'm having problems with this app recently. But if you do want to reach me, Twitter is probably the best way possible, and to stay in contact and keep up with the project. And we're hoping to have another room here for Hispanic Heritage Month. So, yeah, that's it.
Nicole, bring us home.
Yeah, I just thank you. I can't thank you enough, all of you, for having been here tonight, for having shared so vulnerably. I have learned so much tonight. Every time I have a conversation like this, or I talk with a school or with a child with ADHD, I learn. And you know what? I'm a teacher. So when you teach me, you influence hundreds of kids that are going to be in my care. So thank you. It is, and whoever I write for or go teach other schools, it's just amazing to me because my inspiration for my work has been my little boy and seeing him punished over and over again. Sorry, it's hard. It's hard. You know why it's hard? Because it keeps happening. He's 12 years old, and being a smartass, I'm going to say I'm pretty well versed in how to handle the school with this, right? And it still happens. I literally wrote a book about it, and it still happens. He still gets punished. He still gets in trouble. He still is misunderstood, and it's hard. It's really hard. And then I go to school and I teach, and I see kids that are just like tall Jasons to me in high school. And I'm not a doctor, but I can pretty much guess who's probably not diagnosed yet. And there's so much work to be done. And as long as there's children, as long as there are children receiving all of these crappy messages about themselves day in and day out, I just can't stop. And I just really appreciate all of your sharing. Listen, I know that we were getting into some debate about food and all these things, and those are really important debates to have. But the focus of this conversation is really that if you're Latino and you have ADHD, we want to talk to you about your experience in school and how it affected your outcomes. And we'd love to hear your opinions about food as well. So please don't let that be like a thing here. Fill out the interest form. We want to hear everybody's voice. So again, thank you. I'm new to Clubhouse. I got on Clubhouse a while ago, but I didn't understand it until today when Andrea had the patience to explain it to me. So thank you very much. I'm definitely sold on Clubhouse. I will be more active now. And you can find me on Twitter. I have a website under my name, and hopefully I'll be on here more often as well. Thank you.
That's an air horn, y'all. I don't know if that really comes across as an air horn, but
I
that's my
love it.
little
I
air horn
love
for.
it.
you know, you know me. I'm Latino. I got to spice it up a little bit. So,
Yes. I'm surprised you
but
didn't have music for us.
I really appreciate this conversation. These are the conversations that I love to have here on Clubhouse, where we actually are elevating the community, where we're taking different perspectives and we're sharing our stories, and that's really what connects us. And that's why I connected with Nicole and Andrea, because I value their story. And when I heard their story, I heard a part of me in that story, and I said, "Man, they get me." And Heather, really the most powerful share today for me was when Heather said she felt seen. And so many of us around the world just want to feel seen, and this is really what really drives me to make sure that this project gets done, that we have as much participation as possible, because I know there are kids out there that feel like they're not seen, and the more we can reach them and the more we can get them early and let them know that they are seen, that they, hey, we can work with this. Hey, there's things that we can do to help you, to make sure that you're not struggling, and that you're not mischaracterized as a troublemaker, or this and that, all that stuff. There's things that can happen, but the first thing that needs to happen is for y'all to participate. So I'm gonna make this final push. Again, the interest form is right there. That's the link. It's a Google form. Nicole and Andrea will get back to you as Belinda gives you our 100% guarantee that you're not gonna get sold. That it's not a marketing
One
scheme.
million percent. And you know what? One
We're
real
gonna.
quick, I'll say nobody mentioned bullying. And when I heard Nicole, because I get very emotional. I changed my son's school at kindergarten, and to this day, he's 12. He remembers, and I'm going to trigger myself right now, so I'm not. I'm going to stop there. But
I
even that.
appreciate that. No, no, no.
So
You're right,
yes,
and I think that's
yes.
another thing about it. There's so many different things that happen because of this. We the stigma and not addressing it, and then when kids pick on each other and the bullying, and somebody else mentioned how boys and girls are different in that sense too, and there's so many things that we can talk about this. And I've already told Andrea and Nicole that we're gonna have other rooms hopefully as this project continues, and we're going to have other rooms where we're going to talk about it and maybe get even more specific and tackle something more targeted approach towards some of these topics. So definitely, Belinda, I will keep that in mind. And anybody, feel free to DM me if you have a idea for a room or you want to talk about that. Let's make it happen. We can definitely make that happen, whether in this club or in other clubs. It doesn't really matter to me. I just want the discussion to happen. And the most beautiful thing with this particular discussion is that we have a call to action. And so again, I encourage you, I challenge you, everybody that's here right now, to fill out that form, click on that link, fill it out. If it's not applicable to you, it probably is. But if it's not, send it to somebody. Everybody knows somebody that has a child or is an adult or is somehow some way connected to ADHD. Send them that form. Let them know, hey, you know what? They want your voice. They want voices like ours to be included in this project, because right now the structures and the frameworks that are set up are really not meant for us. Can we work with them? And can we? Yeah, we can. But let's set them something else for us, for our black and brown kids, to make sure that they have the best resources possible with something that is reflective of them. So again, I challenge y'all, I implore y'all, fill out the form that's on the very top. It's an interest form for possible Zoom interviews and information to be in this project. This book that Andrea Sanchez Aguirre and that Ms. Nicole Biscotti are writing. The name of the book, the project of the book is called Invisible con ADHD, Real Voices, Real Policy for Latino Students. This book provides a research-based, culturally relevant policy framework inspired by the voices and stories of Latinx students, their educators, and their parents. Love that. And I hope everybody has a great night. I want to thank everybody once again, but especially our moderators, our experts, our two badass Latinas that are here on stage with us, Ms. Nicole Biscotti and Ms. Andrea Sanchez Aguirre. Hope everybody has a great night. I'm going to go ahead and unmic in I'm going to go ahead and end the room in 10 seconds. Folks that are on stage, feel free to unmic and say your goodbyes.
Buenas noches. Bye, everybody.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
Buenas noches.
Gracias. Good night. Buenas noches. Mil gracias.